right on, if you wouldn't mind just taking a few moments to go and get something that you can draw on, that would be great. Okay, and I can, while people are going and grabbing stuff, I can do a little introduction. My name is Anna Purpera. I am a behavioral scientist. I worked for ProSocial World as the engagement catalyst for about 6 months. I have a background in ProSocial facilitation, and this is just an area that I'm very passionate about. It's based in a, a, a few different frameworks that I'm going to be going over today. I want to give you a good overview of how pro-social is beneficial, but I also think that it's really critical that we understand what makes something pro-social so that you have an idea of how to incorporate it if you're interested in it. So I started out with this picture here with the ants, that we have a lot of species that are just inherently extremely pro-social, and that's when their behaviors contribute positively to their society and even at a sacrifice to themselves individually. So that's what pro-social is meant to be, is when we're working towards the greater common good and even at risk to ourselves. However, we do want to also think about the individual when we're designing a pro-social group so that we are able to maintain our membership and keep them engaged. So pro-social, also known as pro-social arc, is made up of different components, and this is one way of thinking about it. So not only do we need to develop an awareness of our internal thoughts, there's a big focus on mindfulness and our values and the psychological flexibility that we need to be able to relate to each other and collaborate with each other. We're also focusing on the quality of our relationships. So not only is it in our internal, interpersonal dimension, it's also the between human dimension, and that leads to healthy culture. And you can see that pro-social in this visual, we go from individual groups to groups of groups. So we're thinking about collaboration within a group as well as between groups as well. And that's just goes along with some of the things that Joe was saying. It fits so well in bioregionalism and this idea of bioregional learning and nested systems, because not only do we need a strong bioregion, we also need our bioregions to be able to collaborate between each other as well. And here's some community projects that ProSocial World, which is a nonprofit that is based in it was started by the people who developed this concept of pro-social. They engage in quite a few community projects, and I think that these are just awesome examples of how pro-social can be implemented in the real world. For example, they have Care and Act in Sierra Leone. This is an organization that does capacity development and capability development in Sierra Leone, and they use acceptance and commitment therapy and pro-social to work with communities. And one of the targets that they had was reducing Ebola infections. And that's because in certain villages in Sierra Leone, one of the cultural practices was that people would wash and kiss their dead as they're preparing for their rituals. And this was a problem during the Ebola crisis because of the transmission of the disease. So Care and Act actually worked with the communities, and instead of taking a top-down approach where they came in and set certain policies, they worked with community members to see how can we keep your cultural practices in line with what you believe in and allow you to take ownership of these practices, but also stay safe. So they found that using a banana tree trunk in replacement of the body was actually a good way where they could continue their rituals of preparing their loved ones and moving forward with still showing that care to this banana tree trunk instead of interacting directly with the body where they could get sick. So this actually reduced Ebola infections, and it was community based, it was low resource intensive, and it was something that a lot of the community members were really were invested in because it was an approach that they came up with together. Another one is the San Antonio Collaborative. So San Antonio was named a compassionate city, and they have a series of compassionate collaboratives, and ProSocial World conducted a large research study where they saw what was it about this collaborative and these organizations that were part of this collaborative that were so effective. And this research just continued to verify the different aspects of ProSocial, that these groups were just embodying a lot of the things that I'm going to be going over in a few minutes. And it based on these traits and what their members felt at being part of these groups, they were able to sustain themselves long term. They were able to make big impacts in their communities. And so this is a research project that they did earlier this year, and they're going to be delivering a series of papers to show like how can this be replicable and scalable, but at the same time very individualized for different communities, because that's another really important thing, is that anything that's scalable and replicable, it also has to be able to be very community specific. So what are those traits that we can carry over that can still be individualized in the communities? And then finally, there's the ProSocial World Latin American project that they developed a network between various nonprofits and community groups across Latin America. And this was a 15-week program where they ran through the ProSocial process that I will show you later in this slideshow, and it led to an increase in adaptability and working towards goals and collaboration across these groups to meet their internal goals. So it helps with goal setting, with coalition building and community ties. And overall, again, the members of the groups felt more connected, they felt more invested, and they were also able to respond to these the different variables that were barriers to their progress, and were able to overcome them and continue moving towards their organizational goals. So there are 3 pillars to ProSocial that I'm going to be going over so that you're aware of kind of the framework that we're working with. And it's based in evolutionary science, Eleanor Ostrom and the Commons, and contextual behavioral science. As a behavioral scientist, I came in through the contextual behavioral realm, and I think that I'm going to be presenting this in a way that I hope is very simple and very easy for you all to understand, even though it is based in evidence-based practices. So in evolutionary science, this is, if anybody's ever listened to Joe, he talks a lot about evolutionary science and how the selection or the variation selection and replication or retention is really critical when talking about any organism. So the evolutionary science aspect of ProSocial that comes into play is this idea of multi-level selection theory, which essentially is the nested systems that we're talking about. It's selection by consequences, and recognizing what's good for the lower level may undermine the higher level. And what that means is something that's good for an individual might not be what's best for the group. And as you go higher, what's best for a single group might not be best for what's good for the entire subcontinental scale. So we want to be keeping that in mind as we're moving up these higher levels. And what's critical and important is that, yes, competitive individuals might outcompete collaborative individuals, but collaborative groups outcompete competitive groups. So when you have a tight-knit group that is coherent and that is working together, they will do better than any group that is not coherent and tends to think is made up of a lot of individuals that are out for themselves. It's very similar to thinking about sports teams, where you might have a team that's made up of all of the best athletes, but if they aren't working together, another team that's the underdogs that have athletes that maybe are not as strong but that are coherent, that underdog team will operate better than the team with the higher performing individual players. And as we move through this evolution of groups, the more we have these cooperative groups, the more they will outlast and overcome these competitive individualistic groups. So it's it's an evolution of that variation, selection, and retention. The groups that are most collaborative will be retained and replicated and be selected for over those the competitive individuals. And this is just showing that evolution, we tend to think of evolution as genes and DNA being passed on from individuals to individuals, but evolutionary science has really developed in the past 50 years to also include cultural evolution. So we've found that not only are we passing down biological traits, but we're also passing down culture through the generations. And it is something that evolves over time. And finally, the idea of polycentric governance also comes from evolutionary science, and that's that small group governance. Rather than this top-down approach, small individual groups will be stronger if they're able to act sovereignly, but then come together as a larger whole. The next principle is Elinor Ostrom and the Commons. So this is, and I find this interesting that there's these three kind of principles that come together to create ProSocial, because there's also like three main people that came together to create ProSocial from each of these disciplines. So it's truly a transdisciplinary framework and worldview that's being developed, and it's very holistic in that way. So Elinor Ostrom, she won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in 2009, and what she won the Nobel Prize for was her work on debunking the tragedy of the commons. So for those of you who aren't familiar with tragedy of the commons, it's this idea that people are inherently selfish, they're inherently incapable of long-term collaboration, and if left to their own devices, we would destroy any common pool of resources. And top-down approaches, policies are necessary to maintain our natural resources. What Elinor Ostrom found was that there is a long history of groups that have been sustainable managers, that have been sustainable stewards, and that work together in a way that they are able to perpetuate and even improve their environment and their natural resources. And through her research, she found these 8 principles that were common to these groups that were historically successful. So this is really a combination of anthropology and economics. Economics sciences, the typical capitalist economics bases a lot of their ideas and principles on the tragedy of the commons. So this work truly debunked the basis of mainstream economic policy. However, it's not super well known because of politics and all of that. But basically what she was able to find was that it really uses the best of both top-down regulations and privatization of markets when we think of core design principles and how to govern these groups. And I'm just going to go through what these 8 core design principles are. This is a very flexible list. So one of the wonderful things about the core design principles is that it's really different for every group and how these are implemented. One pro-social group is not going to look the same as another pro-social group. And because it's so flexible, it works very easily in combination with other types of group designs, like sociocracy, for example. You don't pick pro-social or something else. You tend to use pro-social to support other governing principles. And some of these they're pretty intuitive. So it's kind of like, oh, no duh, of course this is important for group design, but it's also something that we don't necessarily always have in our groups. And in a lot of ways, these are really good diagnostics for how healthy your group is and how healthy it's functioning. So when going through these, you can think, does my group kind of satisfy these different design principles, or maybe could we improve in these areas? That's a good way to utilize these. So the first one is that groups that are collaborative have strong shared identity and purpose. So you know who's in the group, who's not in the group, and you know what they're gathering for. What is this group designed to do? You also have an equitable distribution of contribution and benefits, which limits freeloaders. So if you're doing the work, you're also getting the benefits, and it's equitably distributed. So it's not based on equality; it's based on the amount of input that you're putting into the group. You also have fair and inclusive decision making. So in some way, all members of the group are able to participate in the decision-making process. And one example might be consent-based decision-making. And again, this is one of the principles that's very fluid. It's might not be that you always vote on every single decision or do it, but it's whatever works best for that group and what the members determine to be fair and inclusive for themselves. Another one is monitoring of agreed upon behaviors. So this is everybody knows what's expected of them. We have a set of rules, a set of policies, a set of guiding principles that we operate by, and we're also able to see what other people are doing, so we're able to hold each other accountable. This is really best if it's peer-based, not top-down, not led by a leader, but the members of the group are actually monitoring and governing each other in that way. Graduated responding to behaviors or feedback is the next one. So this is you're identifying which behaviors you want to see more of and what behaviors you want to see less of, and you're responding to it appropriately. So this might be, we're giving a lot of attention, praise, going back to the equitable distribution of benefits for our members that are really doing the behaviors that are bringing us closer to our purpose. And we're responding to those members that might be distracting us from that purpose or who might be causing disturbances in the group. And it might end up leading to somebody being removed from the group if necessary. But it's applied by the individual members amongst each other. And then there's fair and fast conflict resolution. That's really important. So we're addressing conflicts as they arise. We don't let things fester. And then we have a process for it. All groups will engage in conflict at some point. Doesn't matter if it's 2 people or 15 people. So having these processes in place for how to manage conflict is really important. Authority to self-govern or sovereignty is really important. So the group is able to operate in a way that is best for its group members, and it doesn't have a lot of influence from the outside. And then collaboration with other groups. So this is that nested component where if you have a really healthy, strong collaborative group, they're also collaborative with other groups. And it's essentially applying core design principles 1 through 7 to how they interact with other groups. And this is an example of one of our tools that we might use to determine how we're falling in line with the CDPs, or the core design principles. And this might be something that we conduct in a survey. So you ask your individual members, how do you think the distribution of contributions and benefits are? Or you can, rephrase that a little bit more colloquially, but you can ask them, how do you think we fall here? Do you think it's fair? Do you think that when you put in the time and effort, you are getting the rewards back that you deserve? Do you think that we have methods to help you resolve conflict with other members? And you can assign yourself like how close to the bullseye are you, or you can also do it the other way, like how many bars are you filling up within this, and we can kind of compare how we align with all of these core design principles in this by using this bullseye visual. And then finally, we have contextual behavioral science. It's also known as ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy, or acceptance and commitment training. That ACT is typically used at the individual level in therapy, or it's also become very popular to use in organizations with employees to improve engagement and retention. But it can also be applied at the group level. And it is about developing psychological flexibility. So when things get tough, you're still able to move towards your values. You're not going to respond to react. You're more able to be objective in the decisions that you make and the actions that you engage in. You're not letting your emotions drive you. And that enables cooperation and perspective taking. It develops trust, and you start to be able to see the long-term implications of your actions. This is really critical when creating sustainable groups. And it also develops a social or value orientation. So you start to care about the outcomes of others relative to your own. And that's kind of going back to that basis, that quote that I shared in the beginning about what ProSocial is. You're willing to sacrifice in order for the betterment of the group. And this is a nice little visual that I like to think about at the multiple levels when you incorporate mindfulness and values committed action, which are the components of which develop psychological flexibility. So at the individual level, if you let an individual component, thoughts, emotions, take over your other processes within your body, you're going to be restricting the choices that you make. You're going to be responding just to that emotion, versus if you take a holistic view and you step back and you really are present in the moment, and you're observing everything around you and are aware of everything around you, you're more likely to engage in actions that are better for your entire being, not just reacting on that emotion. Similarly, when you're in a group, if an individual is only focused on themselves, they're only going to be engaging in things that are good for them. They're going to be taking that course of action that's going to lead to the betterment of themselves, versus expanding the view to the whole and looking at what's best for the group level. And I have arrows going back and forth between both of them, because we can't also just only focus on the group. In group development, we also have to be thinking about the individual. So we can't expect everybody to just sacrifice everything for the good of the group. We also need to be designing structures that support individual members as well. And then finally, that's the groups of the groups. So if one group, it has kind of a very strong, almost tribal identity, where it's us versus them, they're only going to be acting in their own self-interest. In a lot of ways, this is present day, well, almost all political parties since the history of time. But if we're to take a step back and look at the betterment of all, that gives us a more holistic view, and we will actually be able to compromise and collaborate and move forward. And this is the activity that we're getting to. This is one way that you can explore acceptance and commitment therapy, or the contextual behavioral science portion of it. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure how visible all of this is, because I'm in a presenter view. So I'm hoping people are able. Can you guys read what's written in there?
It's all there. It's a little tiny, but it's there.
Okay, good. Well, so the ACT matrix is one tool that you can use for developing psychological flexibility. And you'll see that it's broken up into 4 components. So the bottom 2 quadrants are inner thoughts and feelings, things that people can't see. The right side is values, things that are important to you, internal values. And then the things on the left side are those negative thoughts and emotions and things that can pull you away from your values, like anxiety, fear, um, and, disappointment. And then the upper side of the matrix is your actions, how you respond to those things that people can see us doing. The right side is, as you can see, the on the x-axis, that toward. So the right side is meant to be behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that are aligned with your values and what's important and what can lead to a thriving life. The left side is more negative, things that can pull you away from your values and things that are associated with surviving. Notably, things on the left side, they're important for surviving. So it's not that we should never engage in these behaviors, but if we're always engaging in behaviors in that upper left quadrant, you're not going to be living a thriving life. You're not going to be living a happy life. You're not going to be being the person that you want to be. And the idea of writing this down and categorizing these thoughts, feelings, and the behaviors that are associated with them is that it's giving you the opportunity to take a step back and look at them objectively. So I can say that, I'm noticing that anger is coming up inside of me, but I'm not angry, because when I say that I am angry, means that I equal anger, and that is who I am at my core. Instead, it's allowing me to put it down on paper and take a step back and look at it, to hold it lightly, and then to be able to make the decision, you know what, even though I'm angry right now, I'm going to choose to engage in this behavior to move me closer to my values, even though if I were to react to that anger in the moment, I'd probably do something different. So I wanted to give everybody the opportunity to just quickly kind of try this out for themselves. So if you could create this matrix, and I'll walk you through the 4 questions. There's a 5th question too, and I can run through that at the end. But once you have that matrix, in the bottom right corner, write down something that is important to you, a value that you have, what matters most to you as an individual. And if it makes it easier, it can be a value, something like integrity, honesty, love, but it could also be like a thing that is important to you. Like your thriving ecosystem, your spending time with your family, those kinds of things. And then once you have that, in the quadrant next to it, so the bottom left, you're going to write about thoughts or feelings that might get in the way of you acting out that value that you wrote down. And that might be something like overwhelm, because there are so many things to do and not enough time in the day. It can be fear of rejection. It can be imposter syndrome. You feel like you don't have the credentials to actually help improve your ecosystem, and you don't know what value you can bring. And then we're going to move up to that upper left corner, and I'll just leave everybody a little bit more time to write. Actually, I think we're doing quite well on time. Yeah, okay. And somebody raised their hand. Melanie?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So I can't see it. So I am looking on the website on the collective noticing canvas.
Okay.
And I believe that it's the right thing, but it's flipped, I think.
Yes.
So I just wanted to point that out for those who can't see. It's really awesome. And if you could just go slower, because I really do want to fill this out. And I'm not sure if other people are having that too, but these pieces seem like they need a little bit more thought, and they're really good. I don't know if we're going to do them in small groups but this is awesome, Anna.
Yes. Sorry. So this presentation I was planning on giving in 90 minutes, but I have a commitment later that I wasn't able to do the full 90 minutes. So I was rushing a little bit. Let me see if I can send everybody a link.
I put the link to the
Oh.
tool on the website. I don't know if that's the one you use because it's flipped, which is very interesting. But anyway, that's what I put in. If that's helpful to you, if you have another one, of course, please do it.
Yeah, that would be that's very helpful. Yes, it depends on who is presenting because it doesn't necessarily matter what order you do it in. But there are some groups that do it the other way. Oh wait, I don't want to necessarily get out of that. Are you still able to only see my PowerPoint? Me just gonna look it up real quick.
No, I think you have to hit present again or share.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is also a kind of a simplified version that you can look at that might help. So yeah, so if we want to go back to, sorry about that, everyone. Go back to, so the first two quadrants in the lower, on the lower half are what is important to you. And there we go. Yeah, what matters to you as an individual? No, just pause there too. And sorry, this is the link that you guys can go to that might help you see it more. And then after you write down what's important to you in the left bottom quadrant, that's where you write those negative thoughts and emotions that might get in the way. So again, I mentioned fear, any sort of self-consciousness about the level of expertise you have, what you can bring. And then once you've identified those negative emotions in that bottom left, you can then move up to the top left. And this is where you would write the actions that you typically engage in response if you were reacting to those emotions. So if your emotion was overwhelm, say my values are spending time with my family, and the emotions that might get in the way are I get overwhelmed because there's so many things to do and there's not enough time in the day and other things come up. One of the behaviors that I might engage in are, I might get short or frustrated with someone, something coming up, or I might prioritize work over spending time with my family. Or you know what, I might just kind of give up and drink a glass of wine or take a nap because there's too much going on and I can't handle it. So just put up whatever, if you were to react to that emotion, what might it look like? Okay. And then once you've thought about those things, then you're going to move over to the upper right quadrant, and you are going to base this answer on what you wrote in the lower right. So what's most important to you? If you were to live in alignment with that value, so if my value was, my family, spending time with them, what behaviors, what would people see me doing that would bring me in line with my values? So that might be things like calling on a regular basis, or spending time with them every Sunday, things like that. Okay. And once you've filled out your matrix, then there's a couple of questions that we ask ourselves as so we take a step back. Oh, and I see I have a question. Okay, so words or vocabulary that underpins a pro-social being. So I think that interesting. So some of the things that I can speak to from that ACT perspective is being psychologically flexible. That's a term that I would say is very important, which I can talk about in a moment, but also that surviving and thriving continuum that we're talking about is important. I'd say other things that are really important is putting space in between you and your thoughts and emotions. So when you're thinking about anger or frustration or sadness, the immediate response to that tends to not be the most adaptive. It can be something that is harmful for you in the long term. Maybe it gets rid of that emotion in the short term, but it probably will not help in the long term. So what we work on in ACT is to create space in between that emotion or your trigger that causes the anger, that causes that sadness. How do you create space so that you have time to really think about how you're going to respond? And a lot of that is also putting space in between you and that word, like I mentioned before. If I say I am angry, that means that I'm living in a state of anger. I equal anger. Versus if I say, I'm noticing that I'm feeling angry, all of a sudden I take a step back and I'm not as connected to my anger. I'm noticing that I'm having that feeling. It doesn't mean that I am. I have a lot of other things going on inside of me too. So it's kind of taking that objective approach. So I'd say that those kinds of techniques or that kind of language is also important. And psychological flexibility comes from when we write down on this paper all of our values, those negative thoughts and emotions, and the behaviors that we can choose to engage in. We can look at it objectively. We can notice the difference between when I engage in my thriving behaviors versus my surviving behaviors. What's most workable for me in the long term? What will make me into the person that I want to be, or move me closer to living the life I want to live? And again, like I said, surviving is also necessary. So we have to keep in mind that we're always going to have those thoughts and emotions that are negative and maybe not ideal. So maybe sometimes those survival behaviors, having a glass of wine, taking a nap, those things might be necessary sometimes. We can't always be engaging in thriving behaviors, but on the whole, how are we engaging in behaviors that are moving us towards our values? So I'd say that's some languaging that you can use in regards to this. But this is an individual. So this is something that we use, like I mentioned, in therapy. I use this quite frequently with clients. You can also have them do it for other people to help them take perspective of others. You can use it in organizations for engagement and helping your employees find what's valuable for them in their work. But in ProSocial, we actually use the ProSocial matrix. So that is applied to the whole. So instead of that first question asking, what's most important to me? It's asking what's most important to the group. And what might get in the way of us moving towards that purpose as a group? What are the things that as a group we engage in? And that can be a combination of different individuals' behaviors or a collective behavior. And then if we were in line with our purpose, what are those behaviors that we would be doing? So as you can see, this actually helps break down, like if you think of that first question as the mission statement of the group, that upper right quadrant of thriving behaviors, that can be thought of as goals that we can set or action steps that we can take to be in line with our mission. And the away side can maybe identify some areas of potential conflict and barriers that we have that are internal to us. So this is what we would use in combination with the core design principles to develop ProSocial processes. For those of you who might have taken the ProSocial facilitator training, that used to be essentially what we would work with, are the core design principles and the ProSocial matrix. And I think and this is actually how we would use it in using with the core design principles. So you can start out that first question. The power of the matrix is that it really all lies in what is that first question? What's most important to you about what? It could be a general thing. So what is our purpose as a group? What is our mission as a group? But it can also be what's most important to us about equitable distribution of contributions and benefits. What might get in the way of us ensuring that there's equitable distribution? And then what are the behaviors that we would engage in when we have those feelings of, oh, this isn't fair. Maybe we should be thinking about how to bring in new members. And it's if we're only reinforcing the high performers, what's going to happen to the others? So those are all things that we can be thinking about when we're developing. What does equitable distribution of contributions and benefits look like? What does conflict resolution actually look like? And if you do this with your group, that's how you're going to be able to choose the processes. Like I mentioned before, the core design principles are super flexible. What is pro-social for one group might be considered totally unfair or not workable in another group. It really depends on the membership and what the purpose of the group is. And then I also wanted to, I saw that somebody in the chat mentioned that it's based in Buddhist principles, and acceptance and commitment therapy is based in mindfulness and values-based action, which derives a lot of things from Eastern religions and spirituality. So it's quite interesting, and it's also based in linguistics, how we use language. So it really kind of tries to incorporate a lot of things like that. This is a pro-social process that's a little bit higher level, that is embedded in more of a project management focus. So if you were to go on to the ProSocial website and look at their process, it looks a little bit more complicated and complex than just the core design principles and the matrix. So it's building context. It's also exploring qualifying opportunities in a systematic systems analysis and action research. And it's all about these iterative processes where we not only look at the long-term trajectory of our group, we're also going to be implementing pilots and testing them out and determining the best way to move forward in iterative steps. So this is the process that they've been developing, and actually there is an opportunity for, if you have a group that's interested in going through this process, where they're I'm sharing resources at the end of this presentation where you can actually participate in a gift-based economy style in this work to get a better look at how might your group be supported by this process. Yes, so here's the resources page. There is a book called ProSocial. This is what came out at the beginning of ProSocial, that kind of launched it. We've developed a lot since then, so it's pretty basic when it goes through ProSocial, everything that I went through today. ProSocial World is the organization that has developed from this book and from this practice. They do they're very research-based, but they are also on the ground, action research-oriented, community-based. They're the ones that did those projects that I mentioned in the beginning. The ProSocial Action Lab that I can put a link to in the chat is this next training opportunity, and I'm actually going to be helping facilitate some of that. So groups can join on a gift economy, so it's give what you can, but it is fairly time consuming. I believe that they think that it's going to take about 4 hours per week or so we're going to be doing some self-development work. So we will dive into the ACT matrix and developing psychological flexibility. We'll be developing vision and strategies at the group level. And then we'll also be using those core design principles to develop that governance, to identify long-term strategies and qualify opportunities that we can take in terms of goal setting. And then I also included, because I know that there are quite a few people who are involved in sociocracy here, there's a nice video that shows how something like ProSocial and sociocracy can work together. So I'm just going to put these ProSocial Action Lab in here. And then I also wanted to give some time to answer questions too. Does anybody have any comments or questions about the presentation?
Yeah, Anna, my name's
Yeah.
David Ketter in Bellingham. Thanks so much. This is awesome. I've heard the term pro-social for a number of years now, but this is the first real dive I've taken into it. And I'm getting all these resources down and all this. But I'm curious about one thing, and I don't know if pro-social and that whole movement has met with adult developmental theory, which talks about stages of consciousness that people move through. And included within that are expanding people's circles of care. So it seems to me that this model presumes or relies on people's degree of capacity to care about the group versus a group larger than them, or either themselves as individuals or the group that they're in. And adult developmental theory says that there's a good percentage of people in the world, like 70% or more, who can only identify with their group and not the bigger group that they're embedded in. And, you know, and I'm saying that kind of black and white, and it's not, it's mushier than that. But that it's, you can't just assume that people will care about a circle bigger than their circle. So I'm wondering if what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, so I can speak to this coming from the contextual behavioral science portion, that it's doesn't necessarily abide by the same principles as that theory, and because I think that the idea is more so that we're focusing on how can the environment influence our behaviors, how can it influence our values, and the idea is that we can potentially train those skills, that it's a skill to care. And while so I think that that's kind of what underlies it. So I think that you can definitely use it in combination with other psychological theories, but because the basis of it is that contextual behavioral science piece that talks about skill building, I think that that's where they diverge in that way.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you saying it doesn't sound like it just presumes that people care, that you actually can train and educate. And there's training and educating, which is different than a transformation of consciousness, how people perceive and relate to the world. So I'll just be looking into that more. And I'm glad to hear that you are actually including some degree of training and learning to help expand people's circles of care. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd say that that's what, so psychological flexibility and that what acceptance and commitment therapy is, it's that skill building, that training of it. So yeah, thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, Claire.
Anna, it's lovely to have you here. Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering about the, it seems like a collaborative opportunity for maybe with ProSocial, or it was the last slide that you showed and I'm forgetting the words that you used, but an opportunity to work with ProSocial, and just wondering what that might look like. If you could just speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I'll put the link in here again. So it's called the ProSocial Action Lab. And what it is 1 to 2 representatives from your group would attend weekly meetings, as well as have some additional homework to do each week for about 15 weeks. And we would dive into that self-development and things that you can bring back to your group. So self-development, development of the group and its purpose, and then also those actioning strategies where Robert Stiles, who is actually he's worked with the UN, he's worked with several different government agencies in Australia and Africa and Asia on that long-term strategies that are in line with your mission and purpose. How can you develop those, and how can you overcome the barriers that might arise? So that's what this ProSocial Action Lab is going to be about. And I think that it is just a really interesting opportunity because it's also would be very affordable to groups. We're very interested in doing and supporting community level action. So, yeah. All right, Denise.
Thank you, Anna. This is just, I'm so glad I'm part of this conversation and your presentation. I'm working on developing permanently affordable housing in Burien, Washington. We're working on our pilot project. We created a land trust to do this and worked with the city to get the zoning variance. And this is going to be so valuable for creating our resident selection criteria process. I just, because that's, there's the built environment, which is really complicated with the development and everything, but there's the social environment and really working like, how do we choose the 27 households that will live there, because they'll be co-owners, and being able to own a home in Burien or, the King County for $50,000, when you earn $50,000 a year, we're going to have a lot of people that are going to want to be part of it. And so how do we create an equitable process that will create this pro-social, climate adaptive, ecological civilization in a small project that can really, the intention is to scale. That's part of why it's small. So really applicable as far as insights. So can I share this material that is in your slide, especially I've been thinking about open space, but also this internal, really what are the barriers within ourselves and how do they prevent us from moving forward as a regenerative culture is really, really exciting. So the question is, can we share your materials?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'll put so prosocial.world is the website. And that ProSocial World uses. And then this is my email address. I'd be happy to honestly, I can just send you my slides.
Okay.
I can send you as much information as you want. This is definitely a passion of mine for sure.
Yeah,
I'd
I
be
can
happy
tell.
to talk to anybody about it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. In Kiala, nice to see you.
Good to see you too. I'm just going to drop it in the chat because I know we're hitting the time transition, but I'm especially curious about how many other
That didn't take long.
maybe in the bioregion already, and how we might collaborate, and then obviously this pattern of groups of groups within the bioregion. So whether it ties in with the Action Lab or it runs parallel or whatever, but it's been something I've been intending to move forward with. Yeah, so that's a follow-up conversation, maybe in the open space. But yeah, thank you so much.